at my son's wedding. He raised his glass, looked straight at me, and said the words that burned into me forever. My father is nothing. He'll end with nothing. The room went silent. Some laughed nervously. Others stared at me, waiting to see what I'd do. I did nothing. I just sat there, frozen, while my son buried me with a sentence. And yet, weeks later, I was already sitting in his chair, waiting. A folder lay on the table in front of me. When he returned from his honeymoon and opened it, the shock on his face was something I will never forget. But let's not rush. My name is Michael Ward. I'm 60 years old. I'm not a rich man, not famous, not powerful. I spent my whole life working 2 jobs, saving every dollar, paying the mortgage, keeping the lights on, making sure my family had what they needed. I believed in hard work. I believed in sacrifice. Most of all, I believed in my son. I gave him everything I could, paid for his college, helped him start his business when no bank would trust him, covered his mistakes when he couldn't. I even gave him money to buy his condo when he got engaged. Every time he asked, I said yes. But somewhere along the way, those yes turned me into nothing in his eyes. Gratitude disappeared. Respect vanished. To him, I was just an old man with outdated ideas, holding him back from the life he thought he deserved. By the time his wedding came, the damage was done. That night is carved into my memory. The hall was full. His bride stood beside him, glowing in her dress. Her parents smiled, proud and smug. My son took the microphone, and for a moment, I thought he was about to thank me. Instead, he looked at me like a stranger and said those words. My father is nothing. He'll end with nothing. It wasn't slip. It wasn't nerves. It was deliberate. His bride froze. Her father smirked. A cousin of mine leaned over and whispered, "Did he really just say that?" I felt every pair of eyes turn to me. Some pitied me. Some enjoyed the spectacle. I didn't move. I didn't give in the satisfaction. But inside, something cracked open. I went home alone that night, sat in the dark, his words repeating in my head. Maybe another man my age would have let it slide, pretended it was just a bad joke. But I couldn't. Not after everything I had done for him. Not after the sacrifices, the long nights, the years of work. That sentence wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, a line he had drawn. And I decided right then I wouldn't let it stand. I poured myself a drink and stared at the wall until morning. By sunrise, my decision was clear. I wasn't going to scream at him. I wasn't going to beg him for respect. I was going to show him what those words really meant. The next day, I started digging. I opened old drawers, pulled out files I hadn't looked at in years. I made phone calls, asked questions, checked records. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking for. I only knew I wasn't going to leave his words unanswered. And the deeper I went, the more I realized something. He had no idea how vulnerable he really was. Piece by piece, I began to see the shape of a plan, a way to turn his arrogance against him, a way to make him understand that nothing is more dangerous than a man who has nothing left to lose. He thought he buried me at his wedding, but in reality, that night, he dug his own grave. And what I would uncover in the weeks that followed would shock not just him, but everyone who thought I was finished. This was no longer about respect. It was about revenge. And my son was about to learn the cost of betrayal. The morning after the wedding, I didn't sleep. His words were still ringing in my ears. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty glass in front of me, replaying that moment again and again. My father is nothing. He'll end with nothing. I knew right then I couldn't let it go. So I made a decision. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. When I arrived at his office, he gave me a curious look. "Michael, this is early. You usually schedule weeks ahead." "I need to change my estate plan," I told him. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. He pulled out a file, thick with old papers. "Your son is still listed as primary beneficiary." "Remove him," I said. The pen in his hand hovered over the paper. "Completely?" "Yes. He gets nothing." He nodded slowly, started typing. "I'll draft the new documents. We'll need your signature." I signed without hesitation. The first cut had been made, but I didn't stop there. That night, I opened the cabinet where I kept every important paper for decades. Stacks of folders, envelopes, records. I pulled them out and spread them across the table. Bank accounts, property deeds, retirement savings, old business loans. Page after page, I went through them, my eyes locked on one detail. Years ago, I had co-signed one of his loans when he was starting out. It was still active. I picked up the phone and called the bank. "What happens," I asked the manager, "if I withdraw as guarantor?" He hesitated. "Then the loan is in default." Immediately, a small smile crossed my face. Good to know. Piece by piece, I began to see the shape of a plan. My son thought I was powerless. But legally, financially, he was still tied to me in ways he didn't understand. And that meant I had leverage. I didn't need fists. I didn't need shouting. I just needed to push the right papers at the right time. For the next week, I worked in silence. Every night, after work, I sat at the table with those folders. I made lists. I checked dates. I highlighted connections he had long forgotten. I called people he never thought I'd call. Accountants. Old business partners. Even a friend of his who once came to me asking for money. Slowly, a picture formed. My son wasn't as strong as he wanted the world to believe. His finances weren't solid. His pride was built on shaky ground. And I was the one holding the pieces together. One evening, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. "The new will is complete. You're ready to sign." I went back to his office the next day. The document was short, clear, brutal. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked me. "I do," I said. "You're cutting him out of everything." He already cut me out. I told him. "I'm just returning the favor." I signed. My son's name vanished from the most important paper of my life. But that was only the beginning. As I left the office, I thought about his words again. Nothing. He wanted me to be remembered as nothing. But the truth was, I had more power than he ever expected. Quiet power. Legal power. The kind of power that doesn't shout. It signs. That night, I sat in my chair, staring at the stack of folders. My son was thousands of miles away on a beach, drinking champagne, laughing, telling himself he had buried me. He had no idea what I was building here. A trap, piece by piece, paper by paper. And when he came back, it would be waiting for him. He thought he had buried me with a sentence. But he was wrong. I wasn't buried. I was digging. And soon, he would see what it really means to have nothing. For a week, I barely slept. Every night, I sat at the table surrounded by folders, highlighters, and notes. My son thought I was an old man with nothing left. But the truth was, I had time. And time was a weapon. I started with the loans. The bank confirmed what I already suspected. He had borrowed more than he could handle. His businesses weren't solid. They looked strong on the outside, but behind the scenes, they were bleeding money. I dug into public records, something most people never bother with. Property ownership, liens, court filings. It was all there if you knew where to look. That's when I found it. An old deed, a small property in his name, tied up with unpaid taxes. On the surface, nothing special. But when I called the county clerk, she told me something interesting. If those taxes aren't cleared soon, the property goes into auction. I smiled. My son had no idea he was weeks away from losing it, and I knew exactly how to make sure he never saved it. But the deeper I looked, the more surprises I found. One night, I came across a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were contracts from when I co-signed for him. I noticed a name I hadn't thought about in a long time, Ethan Price. Ethan had been one of his friends. A fast-talking guy who convinced him to invest in shady deals. Years ago, I warned my son not to trust him. He didn't listen, so I made a call. Ethan answered, his voice sharp as ever. "Michael, didn't expect to hear from you. I'm looking into some old records," I said. "Seems your name is still tied to my son's business." He laughed. "Yeah, he still owes me money. But I cut my losses. Haven't heard from him in months." That told me two things. My son was hiding debts, and Ethan was bitter enough to talk. Would you be willing to share what you know? I asked. He hesitated, then said, For you, Michael, sure. Let's meet. The next evening, I met Ethan at a diner. He slid a stack of papers across the table. Bank statements, emails, contracts. He thought he was smarter than me. Turns out he's just sloppy. I flipped through them. My son had been borrowing under the table, using fake numbers, hiding losses from people he owed. Ethan smirked. Your boy's got enemies, Michael. More than you realize. For the first time, I felt the weight of what I was building. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. My son had built his life on lies, and those lies were cracks in the foundation. All I had to do was widen them. The next step was careful. I called another lawyer, not mine, but one I knew specialized in bankruptcies. I didn't give names. I just asked questions. What happens if someone defaults on multiple loans at once? What happens if unpaid taxes line up an auction? The lawyer's answer was clear. They lose control. Fast. That was all I needed to hear. I went home that night and sat in the dark. My son was still on a beach somewhere, posting pictures, smiling for cameras. His world looked perfect, but I knew better. Behind the curtain, he was hanging by a thread. And with every phone call, every file, every signature, I was pulling that thread tighter. A week later, my lawyer called. Michael, the revisions to your estate plan are finalized. It's official now. Your son is out. I thanked him, hung up, and looked at the folder on my table. One move was complete. Many more to come, because now I wasn't just defending myself. I was hunting. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized this. My son's betrayal had given me something priceless. A reason. He thought he had buried me. But I was just getting started. I had the proof in my hands. Ethan's papers showed my son's debts, his fake numbers, the cracks in the empire he bragged about. But I knew this wasn't enough. If I wanted my revenge to last, I needed more than dirt. I needed precision. So I kept digging. I spent evenings in front of my laptop, scrolling through county records, business filings, and court documents. It was slow work, but I had nothing but time. Each new document added to the picture. And the picture was clear. My son wasn't the powerful man he pretended to be. He was reckless. One night, I found a filing that stopped me cold. It was a tax lien, small but real. He hadn't paid on time, and the government had already flagged it. If he ignored it, the consequences would snowball. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. He thought I was nothing, but on paper, he was the one standing on thin ice. The next day, I paid a visit to someone I hadn't seen in years, his old accountant. A cautious man, always double-checking numbers, but I remembered he left after a fight with my son. I found him in a modest office, surrounded by stacks of files. He looked older, tired. When I mentioned my son's name, his expression soured. I don't work with him anymore, he said flatly. I know, I answered. That's why I'm here. At first, he resisted, but when I told him what my son said about me at his wedding, something shifted in his eyes. Resentment. He pulled a drawer open, slid out a folder, and pushed it toward me. I shouldn't be showing you this, but let's just say I've got no reason to protect him anymore. Inside were statements, discrepancies, records of money that didn't add up. My son had been moving funds in ways that could only mean one thing: desperation. This is just the tip of it, the accountant said. If someone pushed in the right place, the whole thing would collapse. I left with a folder under my arm. The picture was no longer just clear, it was undeniable. But I knew I had to be careful. If I moved too fast, it would all fall apart before he even saw it. And I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd built come crashing down, piece by piece. So I planned my steps like a chess game. First, I updated my will. That was already done. He was out. Second, I pulled myself from every loan I had ever guaranteed for him. The bank didn't like it, but legally, I had the right. One phone call after another, I untied my name from his obligations. Without me, the house of cards trembled. Third, I began speaking to people quietly. Old contacts, old friends. even a neighbor who once complained to me about my son's arrogance. I listened more than I spoke, and I learned something important. My son's pride had earned him enemies. People were ready to see him fall. All I had to do was give them the push. Weeks passed. He was still on his honeymoon, posting pictures from the beach, his smile wide, his arm around his new wife. He had no idea the ground was shifting under him. Meanwhile, I sat at my table night after night, studying the folders, making calls, adding pieces to the trap. Each time I found a new weakness, I marked it with a red pen. By the end of the month, the pages were covered in red. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there again. He looked uneasy. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. He pulled out another folder, thinner than the first. "Your son's been reaching out to some dangerous people. People who don't forgive debts. If they realize he's as weak as he is, he's finished." I took the folder, glanced at the names inside, and felt a chill. These weren't bankers or accountants. These were the kind of men who didn't use lawyers to solve problems. For a moment, I wondered if I should stop, if maybe this had gone too far. But then I remembered his voice at the wedding. "My father is nothing." No, I wasn't stopping. I wasn't nothing. I was the one pulling the strings now. That night, I sat back down at the table. My son was still smiling for cameras on the beach. But here, in the quiet of my house, the trap was nearly finished. All that was left was to wait. And when he returned, he wouldn't be walking into the same life he thought he left behind. He'd be walking into mine. My son thought his honeymoon would be perfect. A luxury resort, a new wife on his arm, endless drinks on the beach. For the first week, that's exactly how it looked. But then the cracks started to show. One afternoon, he walked up to the hotel desk, swiped his card to pay for an excursion, and the clerk shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir." The card was declined. He frowned, pulled out another. Same result. The clerk's polite smile turned sharp. "Perhaps you should call your bank?" Behind him, his wife crossed her arms. "What's going on?" He laughed it off, waved it away like it was nothing. "Technical issue. Happens all the time." But when she walked off toward the pool, his hands trembled as he dialed the bank. Back home, I already knew what he was hearing. "Your accounts have been temporarily frozen due to irregular activity." The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional. My son wasn't. His voice rose, panic-laced in every word. "Frozen? What do you mean frozen? I have money. Check again." But the bank didn't care. To them, he was just another client with red flags on his accounts. By the time he hung up, his forehead was damp with sweat. His wife returned, sunglasses on, drink in hand. "Everything fine?" "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a glitch." But inside, he was already unraveling. While he was melting down on a beach thousands of miles away, I was at my table with another stack of folders. The accountant's notes, Ethan's papers, public filings, all of it spread in front of me. One by one, I ticked off the steps. Loan guarantees, removed. Tax issues, highlighted. Business partners, contacted. Each move was small, quiet, legal, but together they built a cage. And my son had just taken his first step inside, without even knowing it. On the third day of his honeymoon, the hotel manager approached him. "Sir, your deposit is overdue. We'll need another payment method." His wife stared at him, her patience thinning. "Why didn't you tell me something was wrong?" "Because nothing is wrong," he snapped. But the flush on his face betrayed him. That night, while she slept, he sat on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear, arguing with his bank again. "I don't understand. My balances are solid. There's no reason to freeze my accounts." The voice on the other end was flat. "Sir, please resolve the outstanding guarantor issue first. Until then, restrictions will remain." Guarantor issue. Those two words echoed in his head. He had no idea that the guarantor, me, had already walked away. I imagined his face as he heard it. The confusion, the desperation, the first hint that his perfect world wasn't as solid as he thought. And I sat in silence, sipping my drink, the folder open in front of me. This was only the beginning. On the fifth day, his wife confronted him. I married a man who told me he was secure, that he was successful. Now our cards don't work. The hotel is asking for money. And you're telling me it's nothing? Do you think I'm stupid? He snapped back louder than he should have. Guests at the next table turned to stare. His wife's face turned red with embarrassment. When she stormed off, leaving him alone, he buried his face in his hands. He had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. Meanwhile, back home, another piece slid into place. The accountant called me again. Michael, I found more discrepancies. If these surface, it could trigger an audit. Good, I told him. Let them surface when the time is right. I hung up and looked out the window. Somewhere across the ocean, my son was sweating over frozen accounts. And here, in my chair, I was tightening the net. By the end of his honeymoon, he had made a dozen calls, sent desperate emails, begged his bank for answers. Nothing changed. The card stayed frozen. The wife stayed angry. When the plane touched down back home, he wasn't the man who left weeks earlier. He was already broken, already suspicious, already afraid. And he hadn't even seen the worst of it yet, because what waited for him here wasn't just financial trouble. It was me, and the papers that would prove his worst fear true, that he wasn't in control anymore. When my son's plane landed, he thought his nightmare would end. He convinced himself the frozen accounts were just a glitch, a temporary issue the bank would fix once he was back on U.S. soil. But the nightmare was only beginning. On his first morning home, he stormed into his office. His assistant looked nervous, a stack of unopened mail on his desk. He tore into it, flipping through letters, bills, overdue notices. "What the hell is this?" he barked. His assistant stammered. "Vendors are asking for payment. Some contracts they've pulled out." He slammed his fist on the desk. "They can't pull out. We have agreements." But the truth was, those agreements meant nothing if his accounts were frozen. Back at my house, I watched the news on mute, the folder open on my table. I didn't need sound. I already knew what was happening. Every move I'd made had started a chain reaction. And now, my son was chasing shadows, trying to fix problems he couldn't even see. By the end of that first week home, his phone calls became desperate. I know, because one of his old partners, an honest man who had always respected me, called to share what he heard. "Michael," he said, "your boy is begging for extensions. He's telling people everything's fine, but no one believes him anymore." I thanked him and hung up, a small smile on my lips, because it was working. Piece by piece, my son's empire was cracking. At home, his new wife was seeing the truth for the first time. She had married a man who bragged about security, success, wealth. But every day, the bills piled higher, the phone calls grew angrier, and the walls closed in. One night, she confronted him. "You told me we were safe. You told me you had everything under control. Was that a lie?" He snapped, pacing the room. "I do have it under control. I just need time." Her eyes narrowed. "Time won't pay the bills." For the first time, doubt entered her voice, and my son felt it. Meanwhile, I was careful. I didn't push too fast. Revenge isn't about speed, it's about pressure. So I tightened the screws quietly. A withdrawal here. A letter filed there. Calls made at the right hour to the right person. Each move left a mark, though he never saw my hand. And the best part? It was all legal. Every step, every cut. He couldn't run to the police. He couldn't scream fraud. All he could do was watch as his own name collapsed under the weight of his choices. Then came the second blow. A supplier, one of his biggest, sent notice they were terminating their contract. "Too risky," the letter read. "We cannot extend credit at this time." His wife found him staring at it at 2 a.m., his hands shaking. "What is it this time?" she asked. "Nothing," he muttered, folding the paper, hiding it. But she saw his eyes. She knew it wasn't nothing. I pictured him in that moment, alone in his office, paper spread around him, pretending everything was fine while the floor crumbled beneath his feet. And I pictured myself calm, steady, a pen in my hand, because I had learned one lesson the hard way. Nothing cuts deeper than silence. By the second week, The calls from creditors grew louder. One even reached me, not realizing I was no longer tied to his debts. "Michael, can you speak with your son? He's behind on payments. We thought you might cover it again." I let the pause stretch before I answered. "I'm no longer connected to his accounts. He'll have to handle it himself." The man sighed. "Then he's in real trouble." "I know," I said, and hung up. My son thought he humiliated me at his wedding. But humiliation is temporary. What I was building was permanent. And as the weeks passed, the cracks in his life spread faster. His wife's patience was running out. His partners were turning away. His name, once spoken with respect, was now whispered with doubt. And he still hadn't seen the worst of it, because I was only halfway done. And the next move would make him realize just how much he underestimated me. I had taken away his peace. His accounts were frozen. His contracts collapsing, his wife questioning everything he ever told her. But I wasn't finished. I had promised myself I'd go further. So I opened another folder, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old agreement, buried under dust and time. It was a transfer of shares from when he first launched his business. Back then, the bank wouldn't trust him alone. They required a guarantor, a co-signer. That guarantor had been me. And on paper, I still had rights he never realized. I ran my finger down the page, found the clause, and smiled. Majority decisions require both signatures. For years, I never touched it. I wanted him to stand on his own. But now it was my weapon. The next morning, I walked into the office of a corporate lawyer I trusted. I laid the paper on his desk. He adjusted his glasses, read through it, and whistled. "Michael, do you understand what this means?" "I do," I said calmly. "You can override him. Legally. That's the idea." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "It'll cause chaos." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I want." By the end of that week, the paperwork was filed. Quiet, efficient, and devastating. When my son walked into his company headquarters the following Monday, expecting to salvage what was left, he was greeted by silence. His employees avoided his eyes. His secretary wouldn't even meet his gaze. Then he saw the notice pinned to the board. By order of majority authority, operations are under review. All decisions frozen until further notice. His heart sank. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. Nobody answered. He stormed into his office, slammed the door, and dialed his lawyer. Minutes later, the truth hit him. He wasn't in control anymore. And the worst part? It was all legal. At home that night, his wife cornered him. "What's happening? Why are you hiding things from me?" He tried to lie, to tell her it was temporary, a misunderstanding. But she wasn't buying it. "You promised me stability," she said, her voice shaking. "Instead, I'm married to a man who can't even pay the hotel bill without a fight." He snapped. I said, "I'll fix it." But even as he shouted, he knew he couldn't. While he unraveled, I sat in my chair, calm. The folder was back on my table, and a new document sat on top of it. A legal notice confirming my control. It was the strongest move yet, one he couldn't ignore. And I knew the moment he saw it. He'd finally realized how badly he had underestimated me. Because humiliation at a wedding is one thing, but losing the ground under your feet, that's something you never recover from. And this was only the beginning. My son was fighting to keep his world together, but every move he made only pulled it further apart. He called banks. He begged suppliers. He shouted at employees who were already half-packed to leave. The more he tried to show strength, the weaker he looked. And his wife saw everything. One evening, she stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed. He was on the phone, red-faced, yelling into the receiver. "I told you the payment's coming. Just give me another week." When he slammed the phone down, she asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" He rubbed his temples. "It's not. I just need time." Her eyes narrowed. "You said we were stable. You said you had everything under control. Was that a lie?" He turned away. "It's temporary. Don't worry." But she did. At home that night, he tried to distract her with dinner, with promises. "Things will bounce back," he said. "I've got meetings lined up. I've got plans. She pushed her food around the plate, not looking at him. I didn't marry you for promises, she said. I married you for security, for a future. Her words cut deeper than any creditor's call. Meanwhile, I made my next move. The accountant's folder was still on my table. Inside were records of creative accounting my son had used to make his company look stronger than it was. I knew exactly who needed to see them. I sent copies anonymously to a regulatory office. Not everything, just enough to raise questions. Enough to make them look closer. And within a week, they did. My son got the letter late on a Friday. A formal notice. His company was under review for irregularities. His hands shook as he read it. His wife watched from the couch, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing important," he said too quickly, shoving the letter into a drawer. But she wasn't fooled. That night, while he pretended to sleep, she opened the drawer and read it herself. When she saw the words under review, her heart sank. By the next morning, the distance between them had grown. At breakfast, she put down her coffee and said, "You lied to me." He froze. "What are you talking about?" She pushed the letter across the table. "This. You told me we were fine. You told me we had nothing to worry about. But this says otherwise." He tried to grab the paper back, but she held it tight. "Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see what's happening?" His voice cracked. "I can fix it. I just need more time." She shook her head slowly. "I'm starting to wonder if marrying you was a mistake." Those words destroyed him more than the letter did. He sat in silence, staring at her, realizing he was losing more than his company. And I sat in my chair miles away, knowing exactly what was happening. This was how betrayal collapses. Not in one explosion, but in pieces. Marriage, business, reputation, all of it crumbling under its own weight. But I wasn't done. I placed another call. Not to a bank this time. To an old contact who still worked in local media. I didn't give details. I just said, look into him. Start with the contracts he broke, the debts he owes. There's a story there. I knew my son's ego. The one thing he valued more than money was his image. If his name appeared in the wrong context, it would break him. By the end of the week, whispers had started. Nothing in print yet, but people were talking. His wife heard it first, from a friend who called and asked, "Is everything okay? We saw something online about the company." When she hung up, she looked at him differently, not like a husband, like a stranger she wasn't sure she wanted in her life. And he felt it. That night, he confronted her. "Don't listen to them. It's all lies. People are jealous. They're trying to drag me down." She stared at him, arms folded. "Maybe they don't need to drag you down. Maybe you're doing that to yourself." He slammed his fist on the table. I said, "I'll fix it." But she didn't flinch. She just turned and walked away. Alone in his office, he poured himself a drink and stared at the stack of overdue bills, the letter from the regulators, and the silent phone. For the first time, the weight of it all hit him at once. He was losing everything, and the one person who should have stood by him was already slipping away. I closed my own folder that night and leaned back in my chair. Half the work was done. His finances were bleeding, his company was under scrutiny, his marriage cracking. But the next step would be the one that truly shattered him, because he still didn't realize just how much I controlled. And soon he would. The story was out. It started as a whisper, a few lines on an obscure blog. Then it spread, social media posts, rumors in local forums, and finally a headline in a business column. Promising entrepreneur faces financial trouble. My son read it at the breakfast table, the paper trembling in his hands. His wife sat across from him, silent, her coffee untouched. "They don't know what they're talking about," he muttered. "It's lies. All of it." But she didn't look convinced. That afternoon, she confronted him again. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "I can't do this anymore," she said, standing in the doorway with her suitcase half-packed. He looked up from his desk, eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. "What are you talking about?" "I married a man who told me we were secure, that we had a future. But all I see is debt, lies and a company falling apart. He stood, desperate. I can fix it. Just give me time. Her face hardened. You've been saying that for weeks. I don't believe you anymore. The silence between them was heavier than any argument. While he begged his wife to stay, I was meeting with another lawyer. This one specialized in property transfers. I handed him another folder, one I prepared weeks earlier. Are you certain? He asked. Absolutely, I said, with a single signature. Another piece of his world shifted into my control. Back at his house, the cracks widened. His wife zipped up her suitcase while he tried to stop her. Please, he said, his voice cracking. Don't leave. You don't understand. I just need one win, one deal, and everything will bounce back. She shook her head. Michael warned me about men like you. He froze. Michael? Yes, she said quietly. Your father. He told me, years ago, to marry someone stable. I should have listened. Her words gutted him more than her leaving. She wasn't just walking away. She was admitting she thought his father had been right all along. I didn't know she had said those words, but I didn't need to. I already knew where the story was heading. Because when betrayal cuts deep, it doesn't just destroy one bond. It poisons everything around it. Marriage, business, reputation. And I had poisoned it perfectly. By the end of the week, my son's office was half empty. Employees were resigning. Partners weren't answering his calls. Creditors were circling. He sat at his desk, head in his hands, staring at the growing pile of final notices. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't want to read. And then the door opened. His wife walked in, suitcase in hand. This isn't my life, she said simply. I'm leaving. He stood, stumbled toward her, hands shaking. Please, don't. You can't leave me now. But she didn't stop. She walked past him, her heels echoing down the hall, the door closing behind her like the final nail in his coffin. For the first time, he truly was alone, and I was watching from a distance, waiting, because I knew he was broken, but not yet finished. One final step remained, the move that would erase any illusion he still had, the move that would show him, once and for all, what nothing really meant. And when that moment came, he would understand exactly how much he had underestimated me. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. His house. Or at least it used to be. He stepped out of the car, exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his movements slow. The man who once stood tall at his wedding was gone. What walked up the steps that night was a shadow of him. He pushed the key into the lock. It turned, but something felt different. When he opened the door, he froze. The lights were on. A glass sat half full on the table. And in the living room, in his chair, I was waiting. Hello, son, I said calmly. His face went pale. He dropped his briefcase. What were you doing here? I didn't answer. Instead, I slid a thick folder across the table. Checked the papers. His hands shook as he opened it. Page after page. His world unraveled in front of him. The new will, his name erased. Every cent, every property, every account redirected away from him. The company documents, ownership transferred. Decisions no longer his to make. Property deeds. This very house, signed over, legally mine. He looked up at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. This can't be real. It's all real, I said. Every line, every signature, every step. Legal, final, permanent. He turned to the last page. His face crumpled. His wife's name was missing, her signature absent. She was gone. Where is she? He whispered. Not here, I said simply. She left, just like the business partners, just like the friends, just like everyone who thought you were something you're not. He stumbled back, collapsing into a chair. His hands covered his face. I stood, walked a window, and looked out at the night. At your wedding, you told the world I was nothing, that I would end with nothing. I turned to face him. But look at you now. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red, hollow, broken. You have no wife, no business, no reputation, no house. I let the words hang in the air. You, I said, are the one who end with nothing. The silence between us was heavy. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, he whispered, "Why? Why?" I repeated, "Because betrayal has a cost, because arrogance has a price, and because you thought you could humiliate me and walk away without consequence." I leaned down, close enough for him to hear every word. "You were wrong." Then I straightened, picked up my glass, and sat back in his chair. My chair now. He stared at me for a long moment, then closed the folder slowly, as if shutting the last door he had left. And in that moment, he finally understood this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And justice had left him with nothing.